if you're trying to learn about something with nutrition with your kids and you go search online or you go to social media,
Yeah.
it's more likely that you're going to be exposed to something that is not accurate than the opposite.
How then can parents differentiate between genuine health benefits and buzzwords used for marketing? And what are those buzzwords that you may see, whether it's through marketing or whether it's through social media, like that you want parents to be aware of when they're consuming information?
When it comes to marketing on labels, it's really almost anything that you're going to see stamped on the front of a label. You see like the non-GMO, the all natural, like these don't tell you anything about the health value of a food. When it comes to nutrition, what we're looking for is we want to be eating a dietary pattern that meets our nutrient needs. So does it meet your energy needs? Does it meet your protein needs? Is it meeting your needs of various micronutrients, B vitamins, zinc, minerals, all of those important things? And these labels don't tell you anything about that. Like non-GMO tells you absolutely nothing about that. And there's actually no advantage to non-GMO. I mean, foods are being genetically modified because we are trying to produce more crops to make it easier to provide food for the population.
Welcome back to the show. If you're tuning in here, you are on my YouTube channel. Make sure to like and subscribe to this channel to stay up to date on all of the guests that I have coming on the podcast. Today's guest is a favorite follow of mine on social media. His name is Adrian Chavez, nutrition educator and host of the Nutrition Science Podcast on Instagram as dr.adrian.chavez. And we're talking about food labels, decoding food labels, marketing myths, buzzwords, and hidden ingredients, because I know as parents, we often can fall into the trap of these marketing gimmicks. And so I'm so excited to welcome him. Thank you so much for joining me today, Adrian.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. Like I said, I enjoy following you on social media. You're always debunking myths. And as I know, this can get very frustrating sometimes and stressful. Tell us more about yourself, why you started your platform and podcast, and what your mission is in this world as a nutrition educator.
Yeah, so I got into this field initially focusing on cardiovascular and metabolic health.
Hmm.
So I I got a master's degree in exercise science, and was interested in nutrition and just saw how the combination of exercise and nutrition could pretty much reverse a lot of chronic health conditions, diabetes, high cholesterol, blood pressure. Like you can improve a lot of those with nutrition and health. And I got really interested in the topic before I was formally educated in nutrition, and I read every book that I could get my hands on. I read all of the blogs. And so my initial education in nutrition was misleading information, and I didn't know it. So I felt like I had a certain degree of knowledge from the things that I was reading from like popular nutrition sources, because I'm reading these on the side as I'm doing like a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in another subject, which there's relation, there's some loose relation there, but you learn some of the science, but you don't actually learn how to like identify studies and put them together and understand a body of knowledge in a given area. And so I had developed some misleading views about nutrition early in my journey, and going in and getting a PhD opened my eyes. So I was doing my master's degree, started taking a couple of graduate classes in nutrition, and then went and pursued took some prerequisites to try to pursue a PhD in nutrition. And getting the education really opened my eyes to how misleading a lot of the popular nutrition information is. And if you're not being formally educated in this topic, you're going to get exposed to these things, and that's going to be your primary exposure in most cases. Like if you have if you're trying to learn about something with nutrition with your kids, and you go search online or you go to social media,
Yeah.
it's more likely that you're going to be exposed to something that is not accurate than the opposite. And so I saw that in my own journey. And it wasn't a big deal at that point. Like I've went on, I was, doing my research, focusing on interventions. Like I was running We were out running studies, like teaching people. I was running nutrition education classes in communities, and then you see it there. I started to come up there, and everyone's like, people are trying to take. One of the things that came up during that time is people were taking like spoonfuls of coconut oil to lose weight, and I'm like,
Wow. Yeah.
they're telling me about this, and I'm like, I wasn't on social media at that point.
Yeah.
I just wasn't really on Instagram or anything like that, and I was just like, what is going on? This is you're taking in 300 calories of straight oil to lose weight. That's like the same as if you took 7 tablespoons of sugar to lose weight. Like you're just concentrated energy is not going to help you lose weight. It didn't register to me how people were becoming so misled about these things, because I had been out of it for a while. You get into academia,
Yeah.
you get into a bubble, they call it the ivory tower. And then so I started teaching, finished my PhD, and started actually working with people. And you see it there over and over and over again. So working with clients, a large percentage of the actual time of working with people now is having to explain all of the misleading information that they've been exposed to in the past. So that is what led me to getting on Instagram. Is I used to run group programs, like group fitness and nutrition programs, and so I worked with a lot of people through those, and I would be running these chat forums, and it was just debunking misleading information the whole time. It's like, what about this? What about this? And I'm like, you don't need that test. You don't need that supplement. You
Right.
don't need this. You don't need this. You just need to be focusing on the things that I'm telling you to focus on. And so that's what kind of led me to getting on social media. I'm like, I can address some of this stuff on social media, and then when people ask me, I can just refer them to these things instead of having to continuously debunk those same things over and over again. So I try to do a mix of education and also the debunking stuff on social media. The debunking stuff kind of works well in terms of like getting growth
Yes, you're
but I
right,
feel
because
like,
it's controversial, if you will,
yeah,
like you're responding, you're disagreeing. Yep, I
yeah,
know. Yeah.
but I feel like you can't, like, it's not education. It's telling
Yeah.
people what not to do, and it leads them just going in circles. I've seen a lot of people who do this. They'll find misleading information, and then they find people who kind of debunk some of that misleading information, and they never learn anything because they're just on two extremes, and no one's teaching them nutrition. And that's the what I try to do, is kind of use some of that debunking content to get people to my page. And then
Yes.
sometimes just very, and I get no engagement on these posts because it's Instagram, but
Yeah, yeah.
I send people to social media, or to my podcast, to where I really like try to educate in more depth, because at the end of the day, all of these myths, all of this stuff is really just most people just don't have the basic knowledge to be able to see through these things. And if you understand, oh, this is how energy balance works, because it's not that difficult. Like understanding how our body works. I mean, there's some nuances to it, and it can get quite difficult. But just having a basic understanding of how that works helps you to be able to identify a lot of misleading information. When people tell you to eat tablespoons of coconut oil, that's incorrect if you have a basic foundational understanding of how energy balance and weight loss works, which is really not that challenging to kind of learn.
Yeah, and I think exactly that also it's really hard to educate true nutrition, or even stuff that I do on a 90-second Instagram reel with a 2000 character limit, right? So having the longer form content for, like, for you, for the podcast, and saying, "Hey, I actually had a podcast about that. Let me direct you there," is kind of what we have to do, because true education requires the nuance, requires the, well, let me tell you about this. Let's talk a little bit about the science, because that's how we have to educate. And I really love how you tie your content into fitness and obviously nutrition, because they are very much connected. And I think, although I am a parenting podcast and a lot of my listeners have younger children, it is a good foundational thing for parents to know that this stuff is connected, right? Kids tend to be more active, but, how are we balancing that? How are we using screens? What is the impact? Are we getting our kids outside? And how are we incorporating foods into that without dropping into fear, like we talk about? And you talk a lot about this, what's happening on social, and this coconut oil misinformation. Do you think it's a combination, or just one or the other of social media issues as well as marketing from companies? Or where do you think a lot of this misinformation is coming from, in your opinion?
I think it's a bit of both. I
Yeah.
think right now it's largely influenced by social media.
Yeah.
I think companies were probably more of a factor previously, but
Mm-hmm.
now the flow of information is more controlled by the average person who can build an audience.
Yeah.
And so, if you get on social media and you say things in social media, the algorithm rewards fear. If you scare
Yeah.
people, you are going to be rewarded by social
Yeah.
media algorithms. That's just how it works. If I hold up a product that you are familiar with, or a formula that you're using with your children, and I say this formula is going to kill you,
Yes.
no matter what I say
Yeah.
after that, that specific video is going to go viral.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I mean, I wish there would be a way for that not to be the case, but that is how social media works, and there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people who are just making copycat videos of holding up products that people are familiar with, because you immediately create that that that's something you're familiar with. So when you see that, you're going to pay attention because you see it, you have that visual, you're familiar with it, and they tell you it's going to kill you. So you're going to listen to the rest of what they say. And regardless of whether or not you even engage with that, you watch the video because they told you that. So that tells
Yeah.
Instagram that that video is interesting, sends it out to more people, and that stuff just blows up in the algorithm. If you get on social media, that and unfortunately that tends to be where a lot of people are getting a lot of their information, a lot of the in previously it was blogs and books and other things, but now it's I feel like social media is more dominating things, and
You're right.
companies a lot of companies are using some of the trends that are coming out from social media and previously blogs and other things to kind of pull out buzzwords in order to sell people products at higher cost point. And this has always been done, but it's just exaggerated nowadays, because now you can get an influencer to or a group of influencers to, and oftentimes they'll probably invest in the product
Right.
and scare people out of a regular formula, scare them into this other formula that is a cleaner option,
Yeah.
that is 4 or 5 times as much, that probably isn't any healthier, but they're making a lot of money off the difference of the cost. And it's not that hard to do on social media. A lot of these accounts that do what I mentioned, they're affiliated with these products, and so they'll scare you out of using one product, and then they'll recommend another that is significantly more expensive. And yes, oftentimes it is a better product. Like from a health standpoint, there is some advantages to choosing that product,
Right.
but at the end of the day, you have to be able to make an informed decision, and you're not given that opportunity because you're being told that this one's going to kill you and this one's some magic
Right.
health food, and that's not the truth. The truth is that this one is not as nutritious as this one, and maybe it's a little bit healthier, but is it worth paying 5 times as much?
Correct.
Especially especially if you have a family to feed. Yeah, that like I see some of the things that people are recommending, like chips, for example. One of the brands that got heavily recommended for a while was the Siete chips, and there's nothing wrong. Like, it's a good
Oh
brand,
yeah. I remember.
tastes
Yeah.
good, good brand, but a lot of influencers were fear mongering normal tortilla chips and telling people that they needed to eat these Siete chips, which they're a little bit healthier. I mean, normal tortilla chips are just corn fried in vegetable oil. The Siete chips are like cassava flour, which is like, is that much healthier than corn? Not really. And I forget what it's fried in, like avocado oil or something like that. Like, is that much healthier than the sunflower oil or whatever it's used for the tortilla chips? Maybe not really. But those chips cost 10 times as much
I
as
know.
a normal bag
And
of chips.
less chips inside of them. Like I've
So yeah,
seen the
that's why I
bags. Like
say
there's like 10 chips in there.
that's what it's over 10 times as much when you factor in
Yeah.
like weight and stuff. It's like $2 for a regular bag of chips versus 6, and it's like 2 ounces versus a pound. It's like it's
Yeah.
I think it's 10 to 20 times higher cost point for those chips. So like, yes, this may be a good choice for some people, but it really doesn't make sense for the vast majority of people. The solution for most people is to probably just eat a little bit less chips and
Right.
enjoy the ones that you want to enjoy, and maybe pair that with other nutritious options so that you can create a balanced meal out of it. Those are the things that are actually going to help you to improve your health. Like, those are the educational tools that are going to help you to make better choices, as opposed to this food's going to kill you. Choose this one that's 20 times more costly instead, that isn't really going to make a difference in your overall nutrition if you make this different and make this swap. And that's, unfortunately, a lot of that is directed towards parents, because as a new parent, you're scared. Like,
Yes.
I
There's
went
so
through.
much fear-based there's so much fear-based marketing towards parents in every aspect of parenting, like from diapers to ointments to food to it's just so stressful. And I'm a pediatrician, so I know how to, like I know right from wrong in terms of the science, but I'm like literally feel protective of my community. I'm like, no, 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 y'all don't need that, or let's explain why this may, like you said, like why this may be a little bit better, but why the other one, like you said, is not necessarily bad. It's that what are your resources? Like, what are your finances here? And, my biggest question for you is how then can parents differentiate between genuine health benefits and buzzwords used for marketing? And what are those buzzwords that you may see, whether it's through marketing or whether it's through social media, like that you want parents to be aware of when they're consuming information?
Yeah, so when it comes to like health benefits of foods, I mean, we really want to be centering most of our diet around, mostly whole unprocessed foods. Like, that's
Hmm.
where the health benefits are going to come from. Other more processed foods, like trying to get health benefits from some of those types of foods, or trying to like choose the healthiest options of those, typically isn't where most people are going to benefit from like improving their health. It's really like, how do we introduce more fruits, veggies? How do
Yeah.
we figure out how to cook more meals at home? Like, these are the things where you're actually going to see some improvement in health, versus making some of these swaps from like, the Cheez-Its to the Annie's Cheez-Its, that cost
Yeah.
a bit more. Like, good thing to do, like, not something that's like, not a like, it's slightly healthier. There's going to be a little bit less sugar in most cases, or a little bit less oil in most cases, but really it's like the average American diet right now is 60% highly processed foods, and it's really
Yeah.
like, we got to just be cooking more food at home. We have to
Yeah.
be bringing snacks along with us. We have to be preparing ahead of time, and really making that a priority, I think, is the key when it comes to marketing on labels. It's really almost anything that you're going to see stamped on the front of a label, that you see, like the non-GMO, the all natural, like these don't tell you anything about the health value of a food. When it comes to nutrition, what we're looking for is, we want to be eating a dietary pattern that meets our nutrient needs. So, does it meet your energy needs? Does it meet your protein needs? Is it meeting your needs of various micronutrients, B vitamins, zinc, minerals, all of those important things? And these labels don't tell you anything about that. Like, non-GMO tells you absolutely nothing about that. And there's actually no advantage to non-GMO. I mean, we are genetically foods are being genetically modified because we are trying to produce more crops to make,
Yeah.
to make it easier to provide food for the population. I think a lot of people get lost in some of the information on social media, because they make it seem like that the industrialization and processing of food is this horrible thing that is like destroying our health. And yes, we are eating too much of these some highly processed foods that are not very nutritious, but um, our health has improved as we've processed these foods, because and created like new type, like introduced GMOs, and all of these food technologies have actually helped to improve our health, because of increased access to food for everyone. Because we look 100 years ago, you see a lot of people say we need to go back to what we were eating 100 years ago. A lot of people didn't have access to food. We just didn't have access to it. And today we have access to everything. But unfortunately, we have access to both healthy and unhealthy options. But the healthy options are there, and we really There's just a lot of options available. And so with these labels, though, GMO, organic, there is some advantages in some cases to choosing organic. That's a whole topic in itself that I
Yes.
have an entire podcast episode on. But it also goes back to what I mentioned earlier. Sometimes it's 2 to 3 times as much and not much better in terms of nutrition. And if you have to feed a family, that has to be taken into account. You're not going to triple your grocery budget for something that's slightly better, which is what a lot of people are being led to do with some of this misleading information. So, I would pay less attention to all of the labels, on all of the stamps on the front of the package. There's a there's a guy on Instagram called Cheat Day by Design,
Okay.
and I will share his, because that may not be exactly correct, but I'll share it with you. His handle. He takes unhealthy products and he shows how to like green market them with non-GMO, all natural, no sugar added. He adds all of these different buzzwords and makes like a Pepsi look like a health food product, by adding all of these buzzwords. So like he'll take a Reese's and put 4 grams of protein per serving on the front, and we'll put non-GMO and
Oh
all
my God.
natural flavors, and,
Yeah.
and he'll make a Reese's look like
Like a
what
health food.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly like what you would perceive as a health food. And everything he's putting, all of the buzzwords that he's putting on there, are entirely true. But
Interesting.
it's just, it's not, you're not getting the context, and unfortunately the context requires just kind of learning about nutrition and how to feed yourself to be able to look and see, oh, 4 grams of protein per serving, that's not enough for me, and that's not enough for my child. But if you don't have that baseline knowledge, it's hard for you to be able to make that determination, and so those buzzwords are going to catch you very easily without kind of learning some of that. And so that's, I think the key to being immune against the buzzwords is really like trying to learn more about, just the basics. And that's what I try. Like I said, I try to kind of do that on my podcast. You cannot learn that on social media. Like
Yeah.
if I post a video or a reel or anything, just explaining a basic topic like protein on my social media, it won't get very much engagement typically.
Yeah.
And
Because
so
it's not spicy, you know?
yeah,
It's not,
exactly.
yeah. It's
So
not, yeah, feeding the
unfortunately,
algorithm.
I used to do that a lot more, and I just don't anymore, because it's
Yeah.
like Instagram kind of, there's no incentive to educate on those platforms anymore. It's more, how can you spark controversy? And so I just say, hey, I have a podcast on it. Let's, just go check it out there, because you can really talk about the nuances like you mentioned. Because each of these topics, like if it's important to understand your protein needs, and then you can make that determination, because there's so many. I mean, with health food marketing, like you can go into a grocery aisle and this one will say high protein, and it's 5 grams of protein per 200 calories, and it's like just not sufficient. But there's just not great regulations around any of these things, and companies, if it, and some people will, get frustrated about that. But if the FDA did try to regulate, the companies would just use different buzzwords and they would
Right.
just keep using different buzzwords. It would be just trying to continuously change the regulations to address the new buzzwords that they tried to use. And that's where I say, like, it's really just, I feel like the answer is education, and I would like to see more education in like a public school setting around nutrition,
I
because
agree.
just a semester in high school would set most kids up to never falling for a lot of this dieting and years of disordered eating habits that I tend to see a lot of times in with people in their 30s, because they started dieting in their teens because they were trying to look a certain way, or
Right.
and they didn't have the right knowledge. Their parents didn't have the knowledge. And the only sources of information were magazines and you know
Social media, like misinformation.
now social media,
Yeah,
but
no,
back then
yeah,
magazines,
yeah,
and now it's social media, and this is
yeah.
leading just people. We talk about obesity crisis and health crisis. It's like, um a lot education at the population level, and then also, and you know this, like, we just need better integration of nutrition services in the healthcare setting. Like,
Absolutely.
people, doctors are, this is not their job. A lot of people think, oh, well, the doctor should be educated on nutrition. That's not their job.
No.
There are people who are educated. There's dietitians who are educated on nutrition. We just need better integration, and I don't think that's all malicious. In my opinion, I think that's just nutrition. We didn't know how important it was until the last 20-25 years in terms of like overall health, and how nutrition changes can really help to improve a variety of different health conditions. We didn't know, and we didn't have the research,
Yeah.
and now it's there, and now it's building, and now it's just a matter of like figuring out how to deliver that effectively in a cost effective way in the healthcare setting. Because 10 years ago we didn't know how to, if someone came in with IBS, we didn't know what to do in terms of like an evidence-based approach, and we do
Right.
now. Like the nutrition, the science of nutrition is growing so quickly, and providing us so many answers so quickly. And I feel like in the next 10-20 years there should be better integration of nutrition services in the healthcare setting, which I'd love to see.
Me too. I think it would be so helpful. I mean, I went to osteopathic medical school, and we do actually do more nutrition than our allopathic colleagues, but we're not nutritionists like by any means, because it is something that we look at as the whole picture of a patient. But I always want to learn more, which is why I love following you and other nutrition evidence based nutritionists on social media. I will be linking your organic food podcast. Send that to me so I can add that. I
Okay.
also did do one with Food Science Babe. I think you know who
Oh
she is
yeah,
on social. Yeah, we talked about organic labeling and all that, but I want to link
she's
yours for
great.
anyone listening and maybe have you come back to talk about that again. And I love what you said about, the focus always being on, it's been more in the last 20 years with nutrition than the importance, because even for me in pediatrics, what I see is that there tends to be more of a focus on movement, meaning let's get your kids exercising, which obviously we know to be important. But, myself, my husband, everyone that I know that is, I would say, looking out for their health, we know that both are important. And I would say nutrition is usually what's not focused on as much, right? We know that, like, meaning we're not talking about the, whole foods and the, how can we minimize the processed foods? Not that we can't have them in our life, but how can we incorporate fresh fruits as a snack? Like, how can we incorporate those fresh foods for our children, mixed in with the, processed foods for convenience or whatever that child may like. But I agree. I think that I want to see more of that focus in schools on nutrition and quality nutrition education from school systems, from pediatricians, because it's lost. And, it's like, oh, how much did you exercise today? But, and then, oh, did you eat vegetables? But that's not the only healthy thing. Like, what about protein? What about how are you balancing things? And yeah, I love that you're on social. I wish that would be so much more integrated, because for me, I see it as the future of health. As you know, you said it yourself that nutrition and exercise can beat a lot of health issues. And we know that. And we talk so much about that buzzword longevity for adults, but we don't really focus on how can we create healthy foundations for children, right? And that involves parents and how they're looking at food and what they're avoiding and what they're, like how they talk about food with their children. And so, one of the biggest things that I see from a marketing standpoint is, fancy cartoon characters on a lot of products. And I've done my own, like, I go into the stores and my son will see like a Paw Patrol string cheese, which is like 80 cents more than the regular string cheese. And I know you're like, 80 cents is not that much, but it adds up. I mean, come on, like and then you see the yogurts, which are like little characters. And so I do want to, I want to make sure people know that there is a marketing ploy here to put fun little characters on these child products that you could just buy the low sugar version. And a lot of those things, like especially the baby yogurt, which I have a problem with, add a lot of added sugar to it when you could just get like no added sugar and add some mashed fruit in it. Are there certain things that you feel like from a packaging and branding influence besides the organic, natural, and non-GMO that affect a parent's perception of food quality or safety, or are those the big things that you normally see?
Yeah, I mean, you're right there with the characters, and I
Yeah.
mean, there should definitely be some regulation on this. When I was doing my PhD, quite a while ago. I went to a presentation of some research where they were trying to institute some regulations, and the food industry was supposed to self-regulate is what the conclusion was from that, and that doesn't seem to be happening. So yeah, I definitely, I mean, I think it's really like colors, and like you mentioned,
Yes.
it's a whole holistic way of that has been studied very well of how we perceive various things. So these agencies, these marketing agencies have spent, it's a science. They've spent
Mm-hmm.
millions of dollars understanding this science of how we perceive the products that they're placing in front of us, the words that they're putting on it, the colors, the characters, the labels, every aspect of it. And we have to, that it's very challenging, if you don't, that's where I just keep going back to it. It's like, you just have to have that education, because like you mentioned, if you're seeing something with the characters and you're like, oh well, I'm just going to purchase this one because this is the one they want, and you don't have the knowledge to turn around and read the label and say, oh, this one has 10 grams of added sugar, this is
Yeah.
probably too much. That's very helpful, and unfortunately, like with these companies are doing everything that they can to sell you their products, and it's not, I don't think it's malicious. Like, they're not trying to
Yeah.
harm people. They're companies that their sole end goal is to make as much profit as possible, so they're trying to sell as much product as possible, and so they create products that are very tasty, that are very appealing, that kind of catch people's attention when they're sitting on the shelves, that have words that catch your attention, and you're going to be marketed like this in the grocery store. You're going to be marketed to like this on social media. You're going to be marketed to like this when it comes to nutrition, especially if you're a new parent, probably in every aspect of your life. And it's really important. And if you're listening to this podcast, you're steps ahead already. Is
Right.
It's just really important to get the right voices in your head, and really, I've talked about education. Find people who are actually educating you, and there's a difference in that, and it's helpful to identify that. So like, you can, when people are constantly scaring you, they are not educating you. If,
Right.
if you're hearing a lot of fear-based messaging from someone, if they're if it's causing you, when you're trying to learn from them, it's causing you to go into the grocery store and have more anxiety, they're probably not actually educating you, and they're probably using fear to get your attention in many cases. So quality, like education about nutrition or education about anything, in these realms, shouldn't be served to you through that lens of fear. It should be coming to you from helping you to make decisions, and being empathetic about your situation, of like, that there's many things to take into consideration besides, this product has 2 grams less of sugar than this one, but it costs $3 more. There should be nuance brought into the discussion with anything related to nutrition. It should never be, very black and white. This one's bad, this one's good. Buy this one instead. There should
Right.
be more nuance to help you make a decision, rather than someone, trying to just kind of push you in a direction. And I think that'll help a lot of people to be able to navigate this space a little bit more easily, because just the number of things is, I never expected it getting into this. I got interested in nutrition, and I never expected this to be able to be dealing with all of these things in the day to day of, like, all of the marketing and the influencers confusing people to where that ends up being such a large percentage of trying
Yeah.
to help people eat healthier, unfortunately.
Do you feel like there's certain ingredients or additives that are often hidden or downplayed in baby and child foods that parents should be aware of? Or I know this could be an entire conversation around how to read nutrition labels. I think parents don't even know how to do that. I learned a bit of it obviously through my training, but not nearly as much as a nutritionist. Are there certain things that you would say, hey, maybe watch out for these things, or not really? It's really hard to give that nuance.
Sugar is usually gonna be a big one, but in
Yeah.
some cases, sugar is especially in younger kids, in like, say for example, formula, like sugar
Right.
is supposed to be there. And so sometimes telling people, hey, beware of sugar can sometimes cause people to avoid some things that they shouldn't be avoiding. But
Right.
overall, a lot of processed foods will have added sugars and added fats.
Hmm.
That's really the issue with highly processed foods is these they take some ingredients and they process them together. They add processed carbohydrates or sugars, or refined flour, almost the same thing as sugar, like refined flours and sugars, and then they combine that with fats typically, and that's vegetable oils typically because those are some of the cheapest fats available on the market.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these processed foods are just refined flour and sugar combined with fats, with some flavors and other things to make them appealing. And that's really what we want to be looking out for. We don't want these to make up a large percentage of our diet. I think those are the main culprits of like really causing people's diet to really go down in terms of quality. Because if you're including those to the point that they're making up 30% of your diet, you're getting almost no nutrition from that. And it's very high in calories and not very filling. So, for
Yeah.
example, if you eat some chips, you could easily sit down and eat 250 calories of chips.
Been
That's
there. Yeah.
easily, and
Yeah.
and that's not going to be very filling. You're not
Yeah.
going to get much nutrition out of it, and then it's probably going to cause you to overeat in your overall diet if you're including that to that extent. And then you're not going to be meeting your micronutrient needs. So we have certain needs of B vitamins and vitamin C and zinc and iron. You're not getting that from from these foods, from these highly processed foods, unfortunately. And so that's where some of including too much of those in our diet is really going to be a problem. We have to try to avoid some of those things and minimize those. And so ingredients wise, like I'd say the added fats, added sugars,
Yeah.
refined flours, and that's like most highly processed foods are that's just what they're made out of. They're mostly those three ingredients or some combination of similar ingredients like that.
Yeah, I love this. I definitely watch out for those two things, the added sugar and added fats for processed foods, because we do buy. I like to be very clear that I have bought the Paw Patrol string cheese because my son wanted it. Big deal. Okay, fine. But I also explained to him, when he goes into the cereal aisle, and a lot of childhood cereals, they're colorful, like we talk about. They have amazing characters. And although I did grow up on a lot of those sugary cereals, I've changed kind of how I view things. And once in a while on vacation, maybe he'll have some cinnamon toast crunch because it's delicious. But yeah, like looking at those added sugars and added fats, I think is really useful information. And I think I might have you come back to talk about nutrition labels and deep dive. And maybe, since this is recorded, we can do some examples and whatnot. But this was so helpful. I really think it's so vital that we look at this and talk about this, and parents are aware of what's happening on social, in marketing, obviously when they go to the stores. What would be your final uplifting message for everyone listening, particularly those who may be feeling overwhelmed by the information on food labels and all the conflicting misinformation out there?
Yeah, so I want to speak to what we just talked about too, because I feel like you know I probably made some people feel a little bad about the
No, I
ways
don't
that
think
they're
so.
feeding themselves.
Nope, I don't. Yeah.
These foods they're convenient and they
Mm-hmm.
are inexpensive and they can help to meet nutrient needs overall. And so I'd say, everyone, we're all doing our best, and nutrition is one aspect of many important aspects of health. So one thing I do see people, they get overwhelmed with nutrition because they think that it means everything,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't. Nutrition is important, but also movement is important. Your relationships with your children are important. So
Yes.
like don't let nutrition take over in terms of your focus, but definitely put some intention into it and try to slowly make some better choices. So if you know that you have some improvement that you can make, start small and figure out, okay, maybe we can switch out breakfast for a simple breakfast option. And one of the easy
Yeah.
things that I typically recommend is like a smoothie is a really simple, easy breakfast that most people can do that you can make very nutritious. And next thing is, okay, maybe you start packing a lunch instead of eating out. and just take those small steps, and that'll make a big difference over time. A lot of times people, like you said, feel overwhelmed. There's a lot going on, there's a lot of information, and you feel like you need to do everything perfect, and you want to make this major lifestyle change where you clear out your whole house and everyone starts eating differently. And that's
Yeah.
great, it sounds great
Yeah.
in theory, and maybe that's a good thing to do, that if you can stick with it and really do that in a transition period, like, great. But really, like, the real change for most people is going to be coming on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, just consistently being intentional, making those small changes, trying to stay hydrated, trying to plan your meals ahead of time, trying to make sure you're getting enough protein, trying to make sure that you're including, fiber and vegetables in each meal. All of these simple habits that, if you pile
Hmm.
together in your life, it's you're going to be living a healthier lifestyle, and it doesn't require all of these overwhelming decisions. It's just, simple habit after simple habit that you incorporate. And I think that for a lot of people who are feeling overwhelmed, which I feel definitely is going to be the case for parents for sure, because there's just a lot going on, especially if you have a lot of young kids, is really just take your focus there. What is, one simple thing that you can do that you can stick with, and do that, stick with that, get consistent with that, and then move on to the next one. And I often will post like podcast or post on this particular topic, because I know that for a lot of people, it's just like you said, there's overwhelm, and people underestimate the value of really just these small, simple steps and what they can do if you really implement them over time. So I'd highly recommend kind of going that route.
Yeah, and I don't think it was overwhelming. I'm the host of the show, and I always listen to my guests, and I'm like, no, this sounds wonderful. And it applies to a lot of different aspects. I have nutritionists on the show. We talk about child behavior. I talk about development, and it's so much that take the information and work with what you have in baby steps, right? Like, again, I do not expect anyone, or do we need to do a complete overhaul of how we purchase? No, but it's saying, hey, that sounds like a good idea that I can actually implement, whether it's about what me and Adrian talked about today, or whether it's about I have a conversation about how we manage tantrums, or how we manage how we speak to our children. And yes, all this advice can be overwhelming, but it's truly about the big picture of what is in my resources and what is in my time to make little baby changes. When I talk to my families, a lot of my population has fallen into the sugary drink, you know, category, meaning a lot of the children drink a lot of added sugar drinks. And for me, I personally don't love them. I think that we can substitute. So it's not a shameful thing. It's hey, I get that your child really loves this soda or this juice, but how can we maybe wean it off and allow it to be part of their life, but not let it be their sole source of hydration, right? Introducing water. Like, how can we get them that water is really great? So it is healthy conversations that I think parents should be having. And I really appreciate you. And I think you approached it with such class and such obviously ability to connect with our families and our listeners today to make it not scary. So thank you, Adrian. I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, where can people go to stay connected? I know you have a podcast, and you can reiterate where you can be found on social media. So tell our listeners all of that information.
Yeah, definitely. Instagram, as you mentioned earlier, at Dr. Dr. Period Adrian Adrian period Chavez Chavez, and then also my podcast. I highly recommend that one. I really try to break down various topics in nutrition, and really educate about some of these nuances. And I try to keep my episodes pretty short, 15-30 minutes typically, and I will cover one topic per episode typically, and try to just help people understand, so that when you do, like, I might have an episode on added sugar, for example. So we talk about added sugar, what to look out for, whether or not you may need to limit it in your life, because there are some people who may need to be eating
Yes.
higher amounts of added sugar for a variety of reasons. So that's why it's hard for me when you're like, is there anything that you would say to limit? I'm like, it's hard for me to say things without providing all of the additional nuance for people's individual circumstances. So, the podcast lets me do that. So I'd highly recommend checking that out as well.
I love it. And I will be linking all of that information here on our YouTube channel, as well as where if you listen to the audio podcast. And thanks again, Adrian. I love connecting with you. It's so nice to finally meet you virtually after following you on social. And I hope you can come on the show again.
Definitely. Thank you so much.